The echoes of the battle still hung in the air, the acrid scent of fire and magic mingling with the cool night breeze. The faint sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, signalling the arrival of local law enforcement. Clara stood in the centre of the group, her hazel eyes scanning the scene with a calculating sharpness. "We've got company. Darren, you're up." Darren, still leaning casually on Thunderstrike, let out a low whistle. "Man, nothing like a midnight battle to get the neighbours talking. All right, I'll charm the locals." "Keep it simple," Clara warned, her tone firm. "We don't need unnecessary attention." "Simple's my middle name," Darren quipped, holstering his shotgun and cracking his knuckles. Alpha gave a low growl, following him toward the approaching squad cars. "Stay here, big guy," Darren said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want you scaring the boys in blue." The first car skidded to a halt, and two uniformed officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the smoky air. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense expression, approached cautiously. "What the hell happened here?" Darren raised his hands in a placating gesture, his smile easy and disarming. "Homeland Security," he said, flipping open his ID badge. "We've been tracking a rogue group of highly dangerous individuals. They were apprehended during an altercation." The officer frowned, glancing at the damaged street and the scorch marks still smouldering on the pavement. "This looks more like a war zone." "Funny how that happens when magic gets involved," Darren replied, his tone light but firm. "Look, I know this is a lot, but I'll have my supervisor contact your department first thing. For now, I need you to cordon off this area and keep civilians back. We've got cleanup crews en route." The officer hesitated, but Darren's confident demeanour left little room for argument. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but I'm going to need a full report." "Already in the works," Darren said with a wink. "You'll be the first to know when it's ready." As Darren handled the police, Clara knelt beside Caleb and Evelyn. Caleb's breathing was shallow, and Evelyn's eyes fluttered open briefly, her face pale. Argoz hovered nearby, the glow of the gem casting soft light over the scene. "We need to move them now," Clara said, her voice steady. She activated her comlink. "Desera, open the portal to the medbay. Jewel needs to be ready for multiple injuries." "Already in progress," Desera's voice replied. "Sophia's been briefed. She's given us clearance for full support." The air shimmered near Clara, and the portal opened with a soft hum. Jewel's voice came through, calm and reassuring. "Medbay is prepped. Bring them through." Clara nodded to Ashley. "Help me with Caleb. Argoz, stay close to Evelyn." One by one, the team stepped through the glowing portal, emerging into the bright, sterile light of the Echo Division medbay. Jewel, dressed in her medical scrubs, moved quickly to assess the wounded. Her sharp eyes immediately honed in on Caleb. "Get him on the table," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. Clara and Ashley eased Caleb onto the table, his blood staining their hands. Jewel's hands glowed faintly as she began her work, a mix of medical skill and supernatural healing flowing through her. Evelyn, still conscious but weak, was helped onto another bed by Argoz. "You're going to be fine," Jewel said softly, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Just breathe." As the portal closed behind the others, the street grew eerily quiet. The hum of distant sirens had faded, and the smoky haze lingered like a ghost of the battle. Darren stood with Thunderstrike resting on his shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning the area for any remaining threats. Beside him, Rose paced restlessly, the faint glow of her armour casting an otherworldly sheen on the cracked pavement. The lieutenant stood nearby, his posture composed but watchful, his piercing green eyes flicking between the bodies of Draven's men and the damage left behind. Alpha and Omega prowled the perimeter, their growls low and steady as they circled the fallen enforcers, ensuring none of them stirred. Darren broke the silence first, his voice laced with a signature smirk. "So, Rose, this whole fiery armour thing, when were you planning to let us in on the secret? Or were you just saving it for a grand entrance?" Rose shot him a sideways glance, her lips twitching into a faint smirk despite the tension. Figured you'd appreciate the drama. Oh, I appreciate it all right, Darren replied, gesturing to the scorch marks on the street. But I'm starting to see why they stuck that fancy bracelet on you. You're like a walking fire hazard. The lieutenant raised a brow, his tone dry. If this is what you consider banter, I'd hate to see your idea of wit. Darren grinned, unbothered. Stick around, elf. You might learn something. Rose ignored the exchange, her focus shifting to the bodies of Draven's men scattered across the street. We need to make sure Sophia's team gets everything. Bodies, weapons, anything magical. If there's even a trace left behind, it could lead to trouble. The lieutenant nodded, his hands moving in intricate patterns as he began weaving containment wards over the fallen enforcers. I'll handle the wards. Anything tied to Draven will be rendered inert until Homeland can deal with it. Alpha trotted over to Darren, nudging his leg with a low huff. All right, big guy, Darren said, giving the wolf a scratch behind the ear. You keep watch. If anyone tries to mess with us, you've got permission to play fetch with their faces. Omega, younger but no less vigilant, stuck close to the lieutenant, his bright eyes darting to every shadow as he mirrored his elder's movements. A few minutes later, the low rumble of black helicopters echoed through the sky. Sophia's cleanup crew moved with practiced efficiency, stepping out in tactical gear, emblazoned with Homeland Security insignias. The lead operative approached Rose and the others, his expression neutral but respectful. Ma'am, he said to Rose, his eyes flicking to the smouldering remnants of the fight. We've been briefed. Our team will handle the containment and removal. Is there anything we need to be aware of? Just make sure nothing gets left behind, Rose said, her voice sharp but steady. These aren't your average bodies. Draven's magic lingers. The operative nodded, gesturing for his team to move in. They worked quickly, securing the fallen enforcers and carefully collecting any remnants of magical artifacts or weapons. Darren leaned closer to Rose as the crew worked, his tone casual. You ever get tired of barking orders? Or is that your whole thing now? Rose shot him a withering look, but there was a spark of amusement in her eyes. You've been following orders all night, Darren. Maybe you're just better at listening than you think. Careful, he replied with a grin. I might start to like you. The lieutenant, watching the exchange with a faint smirk, shook his head. Your team dynamics are unique. Rose crossed her arms, her expression softening slightly. Unique gets the job done. With the scene secured and Sophia's team taking over, Rose, Darren and the lieutenant finally began to relax, though the weight of the battle still hung heavy. As Alpha and Omega padded back to their sides, the street grew quiet once more, a temporary calm in the eye of a growing storm. As Sophia's crew moved efficiently to secure the scene, Darren holstered Thunderstrike and leaned back against the wall of the Shadow Realm bar, his arms crossed casually. The faint glow of Rose's armor still lit up the sidewalk, but the tension in her shoulders suggested she wasn't ready to relax. Darren glanced around at the group, Rose still fiery in demeanor, the lieutenant ever composed. Alpha and Omega, both wolves watchful but calm for the moment. With a smirk, Darren pushed off the wall and spread his arms wide. Well, seeing as we're at a bar and all, who wants a drink? He said, his tone light and teasing. Might as well take the edge off while we're waiting for the cleanup crew to finish. Rose arched an eyebrow, her lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. You realize I just burned half this street to ash, right? You really think now's the time? Exactly why now's the time, Darren quipped, his grin widening. You don't want to be all tense when Sophia's people ask for statements, do you? Liquid courage works wonders. The lieutenant cleared his throat, clearly unamused. Perhaps focusing on the task at hand would be more prudent. Darren winked at him. Lighten up, elf. You're not on duty 24/7. Rose rolled her eyes but finally relented, stepping toward the bar's entrance. Fine, one drink. But if you make me regret this, Darren, you'll be the one explaining to Sophia. Deal, Darren said, gesturing grandly for her to lead the way. Come on, big guy, he added to Alpha. I'm sure they've got something in there for you too. Alpha gave a low huff, and Omega wagged his tail briefly before following the group toward the door. Inside the Shadow Realm bar, the mood was already a mix of tension and curiosity. The usual murmur of conversation was subdued as patrons who had witnessed the aftermath outside whispered amongst themselves. A few supernatural beings, unable to resist their curiosity, had pressed themselves to the edges of the bar to catch glimpses of the chaos on the street. As the door opened, the sharp metallic scent of scorched earth wafted in, followed by Rose, her armor still glowing faintly. The faint hum of residual magic followed her, a testament to the raw power she'd just unleashed. Behind her came Darren, his easy grin and thunderstrike slung over his shoulder, followed by the lieutenant and the ever-present forms of Alpha and Omega. The room quieted instantly, heads turning as the group entered. Rose's sharp gaze swept the room, daring anyone to make a comment. Most quickly averted their eyes, the unspoken rule of not provoking chaos in the bar holding firm. "Looks like we're the life of the party," Darren muttered under his breath, his grin undiminished. "I'd say let's grab a corner table, but I'm pretty sure they'd clear one out for us anyway." Rose ignored him, striding purposefully towards Silas at the bar. The barkeep's calm demeanor didn't waver as he gave her a measured nod. "Eventful night?" "You could say that," Rose replied, leaning on the counter. "I need a drink. Strong." Silas raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, moving to fetch her request. Darren sidled up beside her, slapping the counter lightly. "And I'll take whatever doesn't come with a side of judgment." The lieutenant remained standing, his posture stiff and formal as he surveyed the room. The wolves took positions flanking Rose, their piercing eyes keeping watch over the crowd. Alpha's growl was low and constant, a warning to anyone who might get too curious. A bold voice broke the tension from a corner of the room. "So she does have some bite." A supernatural patron, a hulking man with faintly glowing eyes, smirked as he lifted his glass. "Wasn't sure the Bracelet Brigade still had it in them." The room collectively held its breath, watching for Rose's reaction. Her expression didn't waver, though the faint flicker of fire at her fingertips was enough to make the man shrink back into his seat. "She's got more than bite," Darren said smoothly, his tone dripping with mock friendliness. "But you probably don't want a demonstration." Rose took her drink as Silas slid it across the counter. She lifted it to her lips, her eyes never leaving the bold patron. "Try me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The man muttered something under his breath and turned back to his drink, wisely choosing not to push further. Silas broke the tension with a quiet chuckle. "I'd say the bar's never dull with you around, but I might start charging extra for the trouble." Rose gave him a faint smirk, raising her glass slightly in acknowledgement before taking a long sip. "Bill Draven," she said dryly. "He's the one causing it." Rose sat at the counter, her drink untouched, as she stared at the swirling liquid inside. Her armor still hummed faintly with residual magic, the faint glow illuminating the tension on her face. Darren leaned casually on the bar next to her, but for once his usual smirk was subdued. The lieutenant stood nearby, his posture straight and alert, observing the room. "They destroyed it," Rose said finally, her voice low and tight. "My home. The one damn place I thought was safe." Darren glanced at her, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "Rose, you know Draven didn't give a damn about your furniture. He was after Argoz and the gem." "That doesn't make it any better," she snapped, the fire flickering briefly around her fingertips before she pulled it back. "That house was mine. My rules, my space, my everything." The lieutenant shifted slightly, his voice calm but firm. "It was a strategic target, Rose. The wards around the brownstone were formidable. Draven's forces may have targeted it for more than just Argoz." Rose's jaw tightened, and she turned her gaze to the glowing runes etched into the bar's counter. It wasn't just a target. It was a home. My home. And now it's gone. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the bustling bar seemed to grow quieter around them. Even Silas, who rarely showed emotion, paused in his usual motions behind the counter to glance at her with something resembling sympathy. Darren sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get it. Losing your place sucks. But sitting here isn't going to fix anything. You want payback? Let's go find out what they missed. Rose looked up at him sharply, her eyes glowing faintly with anger. You think I'm just going to let this go? Draven sent his people to destroy what I built, to tear apart my life, and you think I'm not ready to hit back? Darren smirked faintly, leaning in closer. Oh, I know you're ready to hit back. I'm just saying you'll hit harder if you know what you're aiming for. Rose exhaled slowly, the fire dimming in her eyes as she straightened. We're going back to the brownstone. If there's anything left, anything at all, I want it. And if Draven's people left even a trace of themselves behind, I'll burn them out of existence. The lieutenant nodded. I'll handle the wards and any remaining traps. But Rose, he added, his tone softening slightly, this isn't just about vengeance. If there's information to be gleaned from the attack, we need to take it. Silas slid a small rune-inscribed orb across the counter. This will help with that. It's attuned to detect lingering magic, wards, curses, or otherwise. Rose picked it up, her fingers curling tightly around it. Thanks, Silas. As she stood, Darren grabbed his shotgun from the counter and slung it over his shoulder. Guess we're going house hunting. You ready for this? Rose turned to him, her expression hard and unyielding. I was born ready. The group stepped onto the quiet street leading to the brownstone. The faint smell of smoke and scorched wood lingered in the air, and the sky above seemed dimmer, as if the world itself mourned the destruction. Darren adjusted Thunderstrike on his shoulder, his usual smirk nowhere to be found. As they approached the remains of the house, an unnatural stillness settled around them. The brownstone, though battered and burned, seemed to breathe. The walls shifted subtly, cracks mending themselves slowly, like flesh healing over wounds. The air buzzed faintly with magic, heavy and almost sorrowful. What the hell is that? Darren muttered, stopping short. Is it alive? The lieutenant placed a hand on Darren's arm, his expression somber. Not alive in the way you think. The enchantments are still active, though severely weakened. They're trying to restore the structure. Rose stepped forward, her armor still faintly glowing as she approached the house. Her movements were steady, purposeful, but her expression betrayed the emotions swirling beneath. The house seemed to shift slightly, as though recognizing her presence. The faint hum of magic grew louder, resonating like a low, mournful song. It's in pain, Rose said softly, her voice catching. She placed a hand on the jagged edge of the doorframe, her fiery aura dimming as she closed her eyes. It's trying to heal itself. The group watched in silence as the house responded to her touch. The hum smoothed into a softer vibration, and the shifting walls stilled, as though comforted by her presence. Hey there, Rose whispered, her voice gentle. It's me. I'm here. The faint glow of the enchantments pulsed in time with her words, the air growing warmer. Rose's fingers traced the edges of the doorframe as she stepped inside, the house seeming to shift and adjust to accommodate her movements. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You did everything you could. You protected us for so long, and you kept them safe when it mattered most. Thank you. The group exchanged glances, the lieutenant bowing his head slightly in respect, while Darren looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Rose? Darren began, his voice unusually hesitant. Are you seriously talking to the house? She turned to him, her fiery gaze soft but firm. It's not just a house, Darren. It's a part of me. It protected what mattered most when I couldn't. You don't have to understand it, but you can respect it. Darren raised his hands in surrender, muttering under his breath. Still creepy. Rose turned back to the house, her hand resting on the cracked wall. "The others are safe," she said, her voice steady. "You did your job, but I promise you, I'll rebuild. Stronger this time. I won't let them do this to you again." The house seemed to sigh, the faint hum of magic dimming further as though settling into a state of rest. The air grew lighter, and the tension in the room eased. After a moment, Rose stepped back, exhaling slowly. "Let's see what's left. If there's anything Draven's people didn't take, I want to know about it." Rose led the way deeper into the brownstone, her steps careful but purposeful. The interior was a wreck, burned walls, shattered furniture, and scorch marks crisscrossing the floor. Yet, despite the destruction, the house retained a sense of quiet resilience. The enchantments that had protected it for so long still pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Darren followed close behind, his eyes darting around as though expecting something to jump out at him. "If this place starts talking, I'm out," he muttered, earning a sharp look from Rose. "Focus, Darren," she said curtly. "We need to figure out what's salvageable." The lieutenant moved to the far side of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the damaged walls. "They weren't after material goods," he said thoughtfully, tracing the faint remnants of warding runes etched into the stone. "The damage here is deliberate, targeted at the wards and the structural integrity." Rose frowned, her fingers brushing over the charred remains of a bookshelf. "They wanted to break the house, not loot it." "Draven's forces weren't interested in trinkets," the lieutenant replied. "Their objective was Argoz and the gem. Everything else was secondary." Rose clenched her fists, the faint glow of fire flickering around her fingers. Then, why bother with this level of destruction? They could have grabbed her and run. "To send a message," the lieutenant said simply, turning to face her. "Draven doesn't just act, he postures. Destroying the brownstone wasn't just about removing a safe haven. It was about showing dominance." "Yeah, well," Rose said, her voice tight, "he's going to regret it." Darren knelt by a half-collapsed table, sifting through the debris with his shotgun balanced on his shoulder. "Looks like they didn't bother ransacking the place. Whatever they wanted, they didn't find it here." "Or they didn't care to look," Rose said, stepping into what used to be her study. The desk was overturned, papers scattered across the floor, but the small safe embedded in the wall remained intact. She crouched down, running her hand over the faintly glowing runes protecting it. "The wards held here," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They couldn't get to it." "What's in there?" Darren asked, peering over her shoulder. "Stuff I don't want in the wrong hands," Rose replied, her fingers tracing the runes. The safe clicked softly, and the door swung open, revealing a collection of neatly organized scrolls, vials, and a small rune-inscribed dagger. The lieutenant stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined the items. "Magical artifacts. Were you hiding these from Draven?" "I was hiding them from everyone," Rose said bluntly, pulling the dagger out and inspecting it. "This one's designed to counter dark magic. I never had to use it, but it might come in handy now." Darren whistled low. "You've been holding out on us, Rose." She ignored him, tucking the dagger into her belt and carefully closing the safe. "The rest stays here. I'll reinforce the wards once we're done. If Draven tries to come back, he won't get a second chance." The lieutenant nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The house may recover on its own given enough time, but additional reinforcement wouldn't hurt. If Draven's men return, we'll be ready." Rose turned to face them, her eyes blazing with determination. "We're not waiting for him to come back. This time we take the fight to him." Darren leaned against a half-collapsed support beam, his shotgun casually slung over his shoulder. He looked around the ruined room with an exaggerated shake of his head, his expression equal parts amused and skeptical. "So, Rose," he began, his tone dripping with mock curiosity, "where exactly does one go to fix an enchanted house? I mean, I've been to Lowe's, Home Depot, even a shady hardware store or two, but I don't recall seeing an enchanted lumber aisle." Rose paused, turning slowly to fix him with an unimpressed stare. Darren. What? He said, grinning. I'm serious. Do they have magic nails? Maybe some cursed drywall? How about spectral roofing tiles? The lieutenant raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure whether to laugh or roll his eyes. This isn't the time for jokes. Who's joking? Darren shot back, gesturing around the room. You people and your magical everything. It's like I stepped into a fantasy novel. Meanwhile, I'm here with my trusty 12-gauge, wondering if I'm supposed to shoot the walls back into shape. Rose pinched the bridge of her nose, exhaling slowly. Darren, I don't need your stand-up routine right now. Hey, I'm just saying, he continued, his grin widening. If you've got a list of mystical suppliers, now's the time to share. Otherwise, I'm breaking out the duct tape and calling it a day. Rose sighed, though a faint smirk tugged at her lips despite herself. The house is enchanted, Darren. It doesn't need your duct tape. It needs time, and a little help from someone who knows what they're doing. Darren straightened, gesturing dramatically to himself. Well, I know my way around a hammer, and if the house starts talking back, I'll let you handle the customer service complaints. The Lieutenant Arundel finally cracked a faint smile, shaking his head. You're incorrigible. Rose rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress the faint warmth of amusement in her voice. Just don't touch anything you don't understand, which in your case is everything. Darren gave her a mock salute. Yes, ma'am. I'll leave the magic mumbo-jumbo to you. Darren glanced toward the gaping doorway, the edges charred and splintered from the earlier attack. He tilted his head, gesturing at the ruined frame with his shotgun. You know, Rose, I'm just saying, if we leave this wide open, some dude with a shopping cart full of hubcaps is going to set up shop by morning. Rose shot him a look. It's warded. No one's getting in. Uh-huh, Darren said, clearly unconvinced. And I'm sure the wards are going to stop a determined raccoon with a thirst for chaos. Maybe we should at least slap some plywood over it. Or better yet, conjure up one of those fancy magical doors that lock themselves. Rose groaned, turning to Lieutenant Arundel. You're hearing this, right? The elf raised an eyebrow, clearly fighting back a smirk. He has a point. The wards may be sufficient against Draven's forces, but leaving the entrance exposed could attract unwanted attention. Unwanted attention, Darren repeated, grinning. Pretty sure we already got that covered. You know, what with the house being half destroyed and all. Rose exhaled sharply, her patience visibly wearing thin. Fine, we'll cover the door, but if you suggest using duct tape, I'm setting you on fire. Noted, Darren said, grinning wider. Guess I'll have to make do with bungee cords and a tarp. Rose turned to Lieutenant Arundel. Can you reinforce the wards around the entrance? Make sure nothing and no one can get through until I fix it properly. The elf nodded, already moving to inspect the doorway. Consider it done. Great, Rose said, turning back to Darren. And you? You're on raccoon duty. Darren saluted with his shotgun. Yes, ma'am. I'll keep the furry bandits at bay. Oh, you've found your way here, have you? Curious about what's next? Pauses. Good, because there's plenty more where this came from.
If you want to stay in the know, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications, unless, of course, you enjoy surprises. But something tells me you don't like being left in the dark. Go on, make sure you don't miss a thing, because once you're here, Whispers, there's no turning back.